100 days. That's all it took for Rwanda to lose between 800,000 and a million souls. Parents, children, entire families erased, not by strangers, but by the people that they had lived beside their entire lives. Neighbors became killers, churches became graves, and the promise of never again was broken. This is the story of the Rwandan Genocide. Before 1994, Rwanda was already divided. Hutu, Tutsi, the Twa, they had lived together for centuries, same language, same culture. But when colonial powers came in, they created a very dangerous split. Belgium ruled Rwanda like a science experiment. They were measuring people's noses, their height, their skin to decide who was Hutu and who was Tutsi. Then they gave Tutsis the better schools, the better jobs, treated them better, making Hutus feel oppressed in their own land. By 1959, the resentment exploded. Hutu mobs overthrew the Tutsi monarchy and thousands of Tutsis were killed. Many fled to Uganda, Congo, and Burundi. By the time Rwanda became independent in 1962, the Hutu majority controlled power. Tutsis were now second-class citizens and they were attacked whenever the government wanted a scapegoat. Violence would flare up, people would die, and more Tutsis became refugees outside of Rwanda. Fast forward to 1990, Tutsi exiles formed a rebel group in Uganda, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, and they invaded northern Rwanda. Civil war broke out. The Hutu-led government used this as propaganda. They told the Hutu majority that Tutsis inside Rwanda were spies, they were traitors, they were a threat to the nation. In 1993, after years of fighting, a peace deal called the Arusha Accords was signed. But extremists inside the government, they hated it. Instead of sharing power, they prepared for extermination. They armed youth militias like the Interahamwe. They imported hundreds of thousands of machetes. And then there was the radio. In mid-1993, a news station called RTLM, it went on air. At first, it mixed pop songs, football commentary, jokes, and all that with something darker. It started calling Tutsis cockroaches, mocking them, spreading fear. Day by day, it softened the population. It started making hate feel normal. The groundwork was being laid. On April 6, 1994, the trigger came. A plane carrying Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habayirumana, and Burundi's president, Cyprien Ntaryamira, was shot down as it approached Kigali. To this day, no one knows for sure who fired the missile. But within hours, roadblocks appeared across the city. Extremists finally had their excuse. They blamed the Tutsis, and the killings began. The very next morning, militias and soldiers went door to door. They dragged people out, forced them to show them their ID card, and they executed anyone marked as a Tutsi on their ID card. But it wasn't only Tutsis. Hutus who supported the peace accord, who opposed the extremists, they were called the moderates, they were also targeted. The Prime Minister, Agathe Uwilingi-Amana, was one of them. She was Hutu, but because she supported the peace deal and tried to stop the violence, she and her husband were assassinated that morning. Their children only survived because UN soldiers smuggled them out. This is when RTLM shifted gears. No more hints. Now it gave direct orders. It is time to cut down the tall trees, exterminate the cockroaches. Sometimes they even broadcast names and addresses of people in hiding, guiding militias straight to them. With every broadcast, the killings accelerated. In homes, in schools, churches, Hutu civilians turned on their neighbors. People who had once shared meals together, they now slaughtered each other. Some were even forced to kill their own relatives just to prove their loyalty. This wasn't a war with bombs and armies. This was personal. Victims were hacked to death with machetes. Families locked inside houses and burned alive. Pregnant women were cut open. Babies were smashed against walls. It was terrible. And women faced the worst. Rape was used as a weapon. Between 200,000 and 500,000 women were assaulted. Many were gang assaulted in public. Some were deliberately infected with HIV by militia commanders. One survivor later said, "I lost count of how many times I was raped. The first one was my neighbor." That's how close the violence was. It was betrayal in the most brutal way. Nowhere was safe. People ran to churches and schools for shelter, thinking God or education will protect them, but even there the killers came. At Nyarubuye Church, more than 5,000 people were massacred in 2 days. At stadiums in Kibuye and Gatwaro, thousands more. Churches became mass graves. Some priests and nuns died protecting their congregations. Others betrayed them and handed people over to militias. The rivers ran red with bodies. Corpses floated into Lake Victoria in Uganda. The whole country had become a slaughterhouse. And what did the world do? Almost nothing. There were UN peacekeepers in Rwanda, about 2,500 troops, but they were not allowed to intervene. When 10 Belgian soldiers were killed, Belgium pulled out completely. Instead of sending reinforcements, the UN cut the mission down to just 250 soldiers. General Romeo Dallaire, the Canadian commander, he begged for help. He warned that genocide was happening, but the UN told him to stand down. He refused to leave, but with so few men, he could only protect a handful of safe zones. One of them became famous later, the Hotel des Mille Collines in Kigali. Over 1,200 people survived inside that hotel, protected by UN peacekeepers and staff who refused to give up. The story later became the movie, The Hotel Rwanda. Have you watched it? Other countries evacuated their citizens and washed their hands of Rwanda. Leaders avoided using the word genocide because if you use that word, then it means that you are legally obligated to act. So while nearly 1 million people died, world leaders debated on definitions. Still, a few people stood up. Some Hutu civilians risked their lives to hide Tutsi friends. A woman named Zula Karuhimbi, she pretended to curse militiamen, scaring them away so that she could protect the people that were hidden in her house. The International Red Cross, they stayed when most aid workers fled. Their head delegate, Philippe Gaillard, he sheltered orphans and patients in their compound. And the Senegalese peacekeeper, Captain Mbaye Jang, he saved dozens of lives by smuggling Tutsis through roadblocks in his pickup truck until a mortar shell killed him. These stories were rare, but they remind us that even in hell, some people would choose humanity. The genocide ended the only way it could, by force. The RPF, led by Paul Kagame, they fought their way across Rwanda. By July 4th, 1994, they had taken Kigali. By July 17th, the genocidal government, they had fled into exile, along with like 2 million Hutus, some guilty, many innocent. The killing stopped, but Rwanda was broken. Nearly 3/4 of the Tutsi population was gone. The survivors, they were left with so much trauma and so many graves and just silence. After the genocide, Rwanda faced the impossible: justice for millions of crimes. The UN set up the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. It convicted government ministers, army commanders, even radio hosts who had incited the killing. One mayor, Zanpaul Akayesu, he became the first person in history convicted of genocide. Inside Rwanda, prisons overflowed, so the country created gacaca courts, that's like community trials. In open-air gatherings, survivors, they faced perpetrators. Over like 2 million cases were heard. Many confessed, some asked for forgiveness, others denied everything. It was painful. It was imperfect, but it forced the truth into the open. Meanwhile, Rwanda banned ethnic labels. No more Hutu, no more Tutsis on ID cards. Everybody was just Rwandan now. 3 decades later, Rwanda is not the same country. Kigali is clean, orderly, booming. Rwanda has one of the highest numbers of women in parliament in the world. Survivors and perpetrators, they live side by side. Every April, the nation stops to remember, lighting candles for the dead. But not everything is perfect. Paul Kagame, who has ruled since 2000, he's credited with the stability and growth of Rwanda, but he's also criticized for silencing opposition. Outside Rwanda, the aftermath, it spilled into Congo, fueling wars that killed millions. That's a story for another day. Still, for many inside Rwanda, the most important thing is the killing has never returned. The Rwandan genocide was one of the fastest, most brutal genocides in history. In just 100 days, neighbors killed neighbors and the world turned away. It's a story of hate, but also of resilience. Survivors, they rebuilt their lives from ashes, and Rwanda, against all odds, it rose again. But the lesson remains: genocide, it doesn't just happen overnight. It grows through words, through propaganda, through silence, and it reminds us all that when hate is normalized, when neighbors stop seeing each other as human, the unthinkable can happen. Never again. Those words can't just be a slogan, they have to be a warning. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like stories like this, please follow me on all my social media. I tell these stories all the time. Thank you.